Uh, Welcome to my channel, everyone. Today is the first episode of a series called My World, and I am happy and honored to record this first episode with my adoptive mother, Professor Mary Crock, Professor of Public Law at the Sydney Law School, the University of Sydney. Thank you, Mary. Thank you for giving me your time to do this interview with you. It is very important for me since the announcement of the voice for the Indigenous Australian in the Parliament. And there is a lot of confusion. A lot of people don't understand what it is and why it's so important.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's my pleasure to talk to you. I agree. I think it's very important. On the 14th of October, we are being asked to make a very important change to our Constitution. The Constitution is the document that set Australia up in 1901. So it's the foundation document. And in that document, it never said anything about Indigenous Australians. We didn't treat these people very well at all when we came together at Federation. And this is our chance, I think, to try and begin to make things better from the law point of view by changing the Constitution so that Indigenous Australians are recognised as the oldest continuous living civilisation in the world. For me, it's a statement that we value our First Nations people and we value them by guaranteeing in the Constitution that there should be a mechanism set up to allow Indigenous people to be heard by us and by Parliament. And it's very, very important because this is the first time that Indigenous people are being recognised in the Constitution. They have no other country. They are the only people who literally...
Who are always left behind.
Well, they have always been left behind, but this is their country, never ceded.
True, but why a referendum? Our lawmakers, our parliamentarians, they can make laws, they can change it.
That's true. So Parliament can make regulations, or they can make legislation to create a mechanism for Indigenous people to speak to the government. That's quite correct. And in fact, if the referendum is passed, that's what they will have to do, because the referendum does a very simple thing. It's required by the Constitution. You can't change the Constitution unless a majority of Australians in a majority of states say, yes, we want to change the Constitution. So we need a referendum to change it. Why do we need to change the Constitution? Well, because in the past, what's happened is that governments have come to power and some of them have created mechanisms like ATSIC, which was the Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission to talk. But then another government comes along that doesn't agree with that, and so they just abolish it, leaving nothing behind. And that's what we want to see changed. Of course, every time a government is elected, they can shape institutions as they like, but if we change the Constitution with this, they can't have no voice, and that's what we want to avoid. Quite apart from the fact that you need, I think, if we're to grow as a country and face our past is terrible. We've done some absolutely terrible things in the past. If we're going to face it, then we have to change the Constitution to recognise Indigenous people to have a right to a voice, not anything else. It's a very, very modest request that people made.
And what would you say to those people who would say that this is not bringing everyone together? This is a very divisive action. This will divide Australia more than ever.
Well, I think the effect of the referendum is dividing Australia, that's true. But if we say yes, it will bring the country together. It won't divide the country. Quite to the contrary, if we vote no, it's going to have a terrible impact on Indigenous Australians. 80% of Indigenous Australians, I know there are some loud voices saying vote no, but 80% of Indigenous Australians have asked for this. It's a very modest request. They're not asking for a treaty at this point. They're not asking for a right to sit in Parliament. They're not doing that. They're simply saying, recognise us in the Constitution. First and foremost, recognise us. Recognise that we were here, that we are the oldest living civilization, continuous living civilization in the world. Recognise and be proud of that, and recognise that we should have a right because of our special status, because we are here first, and because we've been treated badly in the past. That's very true. But we should be recognised by having the right to create a voice to Parliament.
As you said, it doesn't guarantee anything. Then don't you agree that with those people who would say that it's too little too late, so why bother? Why wasting all this money and these resources on a referendum, which is not going to guarantee anything anyway?
Look, I think the disappointment is that the opposition have decided that they want to use this to try and build their political fortune, which is not very good at the moment. Yes, it's little. It's always late, but never too late. I really think that if we're going to develop as a country, we need to face our past, and we can't do it quickly enough.
So you agree if I say that everything has to start somewhere, and for us as a nation to, together with the Indigenous population of this country, to go together, move on forward together, I think we can take an example from New Zealand as well, because I think the Indigenous population in New Zealand hasn't been treated as badly as the Indigenous population in Australia. Do you agree with that?
Well, look, New Zealand had their wars, the Maori Wars, just like we had wars with our Indigenous people, but it's a much smaller space. It's a smaller island, and although they also have their tribes and their clans and their groups, they have been able to speak with one voice earlier than our Indigenous people have. The big difference in New Zealand is that they had a treaty, and although the Treaty of Waitangi didn't mean very much when it was done, the Indigenous people there suffered very much. It certainly means more now. And I agree with you. I think they represent a model of good behaviour. I certainly don't agree that the Treaty of Waitangi has been bad for New Zealand. I think it's created it's created a much fairer society. It's also created a legal system where the Indigenous people and their language is recognised. You can't be a politician in New Zealand, a serious politician, if you can't speak some Maori, which I think is great.
Earlier, before the recording, when we were chatting, you mentioned that there are a lot of differences, for example, in life expectancy and everything between white Australian and Indigenous Australian. There are more Indigenous male more likely to end up in jail than white Australian. Can you please just explain that?
That's right. For a number of years now, Australian parliamentarians have been giving a report each year on what is the difference between various statistics on Indigenous Australians compared with white Australians. And we know that there is a real gap at all sorts of levels, in infant mortality, mothers having a very bad time in childbirth. It's still the case that a young Indigenous male is more likely to be put in jail than to go to university. And this is shameful in a wealthy country like Australia. and we need to do something about it. My personal view is that a vote no on the 14th of October is a vote to make no change, so that we continue like that. Now, yes, if we do vote yes, there will be a lot of work, yes or no, there'll be a lot of work to do on the 15th of October. There's no doubt about that. And I think we have a government that's committed to trying to make life better for Indigenous Australians, for all of us to do better. And so I do think, however, that if we vote yes, we'll be making a big step towards recognising that when you've got a problem, you're always going to do better if you talk to people and you get their ideas on what's going to work for them. The past and what hasn't worked, I think, has been White Australia coming in and saying, oh yes, you've got a real problem. Your children are not attending school. Your children are burning cars. Your children are doing this, are doing that. We will tell you what to do. It's never going to work. You have to work with people and get them to work. And if you look across Australia, there are voices that have already been created. Most of the states already, in fact, have a treaty process that they've begun. So I think that we are already moving ahead as a country. But the point I think I'd like to make here is if you look at particular communities where they have established a voice, where they have got a strong network of elders who are listening to their community and reporting back and working with government authorities, those communities are doing a whole lot better than communities where they have not been given the resources or have not been able to do that. So we've got some good examples to build on. It's not as if we are going into a vacuum here and that this is another thing that's being imposed. The whole point of the voice is that in 2017, Indigenous leaders from all over Australia gathered in the centre of the country at Uluru, the heart of Australia. They came up with a statement, and the statement began with, "Give us a voice." And then we can start to talk about treaty and telling the truth of the past.
Thank you very much, Mary. I don't think of a better way to explaining it to people than talking to you, a public law expert. Thanks again for being part of it. I've been part of it myself. Just last couple of sentences you want to say to people who are still undecided. As every election, a lot of Australians keep it to the last minute. For those people who are still undecided to vote yes or no in this referendum, what would you say to them?
I would ask that everybody really think carefully before they go in there. When you write no on the paper, think about what you're doing. Think about what you're doing for the country. Think about how the rest of the world sees Australia. With our racist history of the White Australia policy, do we want people to think that we haven't changed, that we're still back there? If you don't know what it's about, you've got time, you've got 2 weeks, ask. The idea that you should, if you don't know, vote no is an absolute nonsense. If you don't know, ask. But think about this, think about what you're doing, because yes means I want to change things, I want a better future for Australia. No means more of the same, more failure. And I think that would be very disappointing.
Thank you very much, Mary. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.